I'm a 27-year-old guy, and a few weeks ago, my entire life changed. My Aunt Eleanor, wealthy, eccentric, and the black sheep of our family, passed away suddenly. She was in her late 70s and had lived alone in her massive Gothic-style mansion for as long as I could remember. No husband, no kids, barely any contact with the family except for the occasional letters she sent me. She was always kind to me, even when the rest of the family dismissed her as a strange old woman. When we got the news of her passing, my parents and extended family weren't exactly grief-stricken. They were more interested in what came next, the inheritance. Eleanor was rich, and her estate was worth a fortune. Everyone assumed the wealth would be split among the family, which meant a big payday for my parents' uncle and cousins. A week after her funeral, we all gathered at her lawyer's office. It was a tense affair. My parents sat beside me, acting like they already knew they'd be walking out with a hefty sum. My uncle and his two sons were whispering in the corner, already planning how they'd spend their shares. Nobody seemed sad. Nobody talked about Eleanor like she was a person, just a source of money. Then, the lawyer opened the will. It was like a bomb went off in the room. Eleanor had left everything to me. The house, the land, the investments, and every liquid asset in her name. My parents and the rest of the family got small amounts, enough that it wasn't a total insult, but nowhere near what they had expected. Before anyone could even process it, the lawyer dropped another shock. There were conditions. To inherit everything, I had to live in the mansion for 1 full year, make no major changes to the property, and this part made everyone pause. Never let the house be empty overnight. If I failed any of these conditions, the entire estate would go to a distant charity instead. My uncle immediately jumped up, shouting about how unfair it was, how Eleanor was clearly insane, and how there was no way this would hold up in court. My cousins were furious, one of them even accusing me of manipulating Eleanor. My parents weren't much better. They just kept repeating that this wasn't what she would have wanted, as if they knew her better than I did. The lawyer stayed calm through all of it. When things settled, he handed me a sealed envelope. "For your eyes only," he said. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I left the office in a daze, ignoring the glares from my family. They were already talking about contesting the will, but I wasn't listening. The reality of the situation hit me as I drove toward the mansion. I was now the owner of one of the strangest, most intimidating houses I'd ever seen. That night, I moved in. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew my uncle was already looking for ways to get me out of the picture. The place was exactly as I remembered it from childhood. Towering, old, filled with heavy wooden furniture and dim lighting. Eleanor had never modernized it. The whole place felt like it was stuck in time. Once I was inside, I finally opened the letter from Eleanor. It was short, barely a paragraph. Follow the conditions no matter what. Never let the house be empty. Never break the rules. There is more at stake than you know. I didn't sleep much that first night. The house was too quiet. Even the air felt thick, like the walls were holding in years of something unspoken. Then, around 2 in the morning, I heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible. But there, footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the second floor. I was alone. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises, right? But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, something gnawed at me. Why had Eleanor cared so much about the house being occupied? The next morning, the legal battle began. My uncle was already threatening to fight the will. He told me I should walk away, let the courts figure it out, and that it wasn't worth the trouble. My parents were no better. They thought I was being greedy for not immediately agreeing to share what Eleanor had left me. I barely listened. My mind was on the house. Something felt off about it. Then, later that afternoon, I met the groundskeeper. He was an old man, the kind who looked like he'd been working the land his whole life. He didn't say much, just eyed me warily when I introduced myself as the new owner. Before he left, he muttered something under his breath. "You're not the first to try staying here. Just don't break the rules." The second night in the mansion was worse than the first. I spent the day trying to settle in, but it was impossible to shake the unease. The house had a presence like something was watching, just out of sight. It wasn't just the size of it or the dim lighting. It was something deeper, something I couldn't put into words. I decided to explore more, checking out rooms I hadn't stepped into since I was a kid. Most were untouched, dust-covered relics of Eleanor's life. But in the library, behind a bookshelf, I found something strange, a hidden doorway. Inside was a small study, lined with old yellowed newspapers and handwritten letters stacked neatly on a desk. The papers all had one thing in common: missing persons reports. The dates spanned decades, different names, different faces, all disappearing from the area around Eleanor's estate. A few had notes scribbled in the margins in Eleanor's handwriting, vanished overnight. No forced entry. House kept them. I barely had time to process it before my phone buzzed. My lawyer. My uncle had wasted no time, filing to contest the will on 2 fronts. First, he argued Eleanor was mentally unfit due to her reclusive behavior, citing past medical records. Second, he claimed the conditions in the will were legally unenforceable since they forced an heir to remain in a location under duress. My lawyer assured me that unless he proved coercion, the will would stand, but the process could take months. On top of that, he was trying to argue that I wasn't emotionally fit to handle the inheritance. It was obvious what he wanted. If he could get me removed, he could take the house and everything that came with it. I stayed on the phone for a while, going over options, when I heard it again. Footsteps. This time, they weren't faint or distant. They were right above me, pacing across the second-floor hallway. I stayed completely still, listening. The creaking floorboards moved from one end to the other, then stopped. A long, empty silence stretched out before something new, a slow, deliberate knock on the ceiling. I backed out of the study, shut the bookshelf, and locked the library door behind me. That night, I nearly broke the rules. I was woken up around midnight by banging at the front door. I checked the security cameras. My cousin was outside, drunk, yelling for me to come out. I stepped onto the porch, keeping the door open behind me. He was swaying, barely able to stand, slurring something about how this whole thing was a joke, and how I should stop pretending I cared about Eleanor. Then he dared me to step off the porch. The moment he said it, I knew. He wasn't just here to pick a fight. He wanted me to break the rules. I turned to go back inside, but something moved upstairs. The second-floor window, just above the porch, had a shadow standing behind it. Tall, unmoving, watching. I was alone in the house. I didn't say another word. I walked back inside and locked the door. My cousin kept banging outside for another few minutes before finally leaving. I checked the upstairs hallway. Empty. But something had changed. The locked room's door looked different, like someone had been messing with it. The next morning, I found dead birds on the porch. Not one or two, 7. Their necks were broken, their bodies scattered like they had slammed into the house at full speed. I cleaned them up, but the sight stuck with me. Later that day, I got a call from someone unexpected. My cousin's ex-girlfriend. She told me that, years ago, Eleanor had confided in her. She said she was never alone in that house. Not once. That night, I barely slept. Just past 2 a.m., I heard my name. A whisper, soft, stretched out, coming from outside the window. I sat up and checked the cameras. Nothing. I closed my eyes. I wasn't going to fall for it. Then the house made its next move. Every single door locked at once. A sharp, metallic click echoed through the mansion. I jumped out of bed, checked the door to my room, locked from the outside. I grabbed Eleanor's journal from the nightstand and flipped through the pages, searching for anything, any hint of what was happening. Then I saw it. The house doesn't like being empty, but if it deems you unworthy or weak, it forces you out. That's why Eleanor stayed. She had earned its acceptance, its twisted version of loyalty. I was still an outsider, and it was testing me. I managed to get out using a passage Eleanor had mentioned in one of her letters, a hidden stairwell behind the fireplace. When I reached the main hallway, the locked room caught my eye. The scratches were fresh. Something had been trying to get out. By the 4th night, I was done. I hadn't slept properly since moving in. The footsteps, the locked doors, the dead birds, the scratches on the sealed room. Every night, something new. Every night, the house pushed harder. At around 8 p.m., I made a decision. I grabbed my car keys and headed outside. I was going to a hotel, just for a night, just to sleep without hearing whispers in the dark. The rules said the house couldn't be empty, but that was superstition. Eleanor had been paranoid. The car wouldn't start. I tried again. Nothing. Battery was fine. Gas tank was full. No reason for it. I checked my phone. It was still at 85% when I left the house. Now it was dead. I went back inside. Midnight hit. The power went out. The mansion swallowed everything in darkness. No lights, no sound, just thick, suffocating silence. Then scraping. It came from upstairs. A heavy dragging sound, like furniture being pulled across the floor. I grabbed a flashlight and moved cautiously toward the second floor. The noise stopped. I checked every room. Everything was exactly where it had been. No chairs out of place, no scratches on the floor. Back in my bedroom, I lit a candle. It flickered violently, but the air was still. No windows open. No draft. Then 3 knocks. Not on my door, from inside the walls. The next morning I got a call from my lawyer. My uncle was pushing full speed ahead with the lawsuit, claiming the conditions in Eleanor's will were obviously fraudulent and that I was taking advantage of the situation. If he won, I'd lose everything. I barely listened. I was too focused on what I'd found the night before. Buried in Eleanor's files, I discovered an obituary. Someone who had gone missing inside their own home. No forced entry. No sign of struggle. Just gone. The date, the same year Eleanor inherited the house. That night, the house escalated. At 11:50 p.m., my lawyer called again. Urgently, check the windows. I did. Every single one was open. Every single one, despite being locked when I went to bed. I shut them, one by one. I made it to the last window when I saw something. A reflection in the glass. Not mine. Something standing behind me. I didn't turn around. I locked the window, walked back to my room, and shut the door. The next morning my uncle's lawyer reached out with an offer. $200,000. If I walked away now, he'd wire the money immediately. No lawsuit. No further hassle. Just leave the house and never look back. I didn't answer. That night, at a family event, one of my cousins got too drunk. He started laughing to himself, shaking his head, then muttered under his breath, "My uncle doesn't care about the money. He just doesn't want you to have it." That same night, at exactly 2 a.m., the locked room rattled violently. The bolts held, but the handle twisted on its own. I checked the security cameras. The attic door, which I had never opened, was wide open. The next day, I found the old groundskeeper outside. He was standing near the edge of the property, staring at the mansion. I walked up to him, expecting him to avoid the conversation. This time, he spoke first. "If you ever hear your name whispered at night, do not answer." He didn't explain, just walked away. By the next evening, I was given another way out. A distant relative, one I barely knew, offered to let me stay with them while the legal battle played out. I could leave, sleep peacefully, be free of all of it. It sounded perfect. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys. Then, at the last second, I flipped open Eleanor's journal. A single sentence stood out: "If you leave, it will follow." By the end of the week, the house wasn't just haunted, it was angry. I barely left my room at night anymore. The whispers had changed. They weren't just calling my name from the locked room. Now they were behind me, soft, almost playful, repeating my name like a child, testing a word for the first time, and every time I turned to look, nothing. The legal battle got worse. My uncle filed an emergency hearing, arguing that Eleanor's will was legally unenforceable, and that I was mentally unfit to maintain the estate. My lawyer, who had been confident before, wasn't anymore. If my uncle got enough of the family on his side, I could be removed. That same night, at exactly midnight, the power went out. Not just the lights, everything. My phone, my laptop, both had been charging. Both were suddenly dead. Then the locked room's handle moved. Not shaking, not violent. A slow, deliberate turn, like someone testing if it would open. The bolts held. I stayed awake until dawn. The next morning, I drove to my lawyer's office. I needed to know if I actually had a shot at keeping the house. When I arrived, he slid a second envelope toward me. The first letter from Eleanor had warned me to follow the conditions. This one was worse. "If the house feels abandoned, it will force you to leave." I didn't understand what that meant. Then, at 3 a.m., my car alarm blared. I ran outside. The house was unlocked. Every single door, including the one I had locked before bed. The family betrayal came next. One of my cousins, the only one who had acted neutral through all this, took my uncle's side. He testified that I was spiraling, losing it, and paranoid, that living alone in the house was messing with my mind. The next morning, the groundskeeper was gone. I waited. No calls, no messages, just vanished. I stopped sleeping at night. Instead, I stayed in Eleanor's study, going through her records. That's when I found the hidden panel. Inside was a safe. Inside the safe was a stack of letters, an old photograph of Eleanor, and a rusted key. The picture was strange. Eleanor was standing beside a man, but his face was scratched out. The rusted key fit the locked room. I stared at it for a long time. I could open it, but something inside me screamed not to. My uncle made another offer, half the inheritance. All I had to do was walk away. It wasn't just about the money. I realized he wasn't trying to take the house for its value. He was afraid of what was inside, but he also wanted control over it. If I left, he could contain or use whatever was lurking within these walls. I had 1 month left before the court decided my fate. That night, I woke up to my bedroom door wide open. The hallway was pitch black. And then, a voice whispered from the dark, "Leave." I gripped the rusted key. I walked toward the locked room. Whatever was inside, I needed to know the truth. The key was heavier than it looked. Rusted, worn, ice cold in my hand. I stood in front of the sealed room for what felt like an hour before I finally pushed the key into the lock. It barely turned. The metal scraped against the old mechanism, resisting, like the door itself didn't want to open. Then click. The moment the lock gave way, the entire house fell silent. No creaking floorboards, no distant hum of pipes, just a suffocating absolute stillness. I pushed the door open. The air inside was freezing. Dust covered every surface, thick and untouched. The room was small, too small for a master bedroom. The walls were lined with covered mirrors. Old rotting furniture sat in the corners, draped in white sheets, and in the center, a locked trunk. The scent of damp earth and decay hung in the air. Something was wrong. I stepped inside. I knelt in front of the trunk. The latch was rusted, but it wasn't locked. Inside were letters, stacks of them, yellowed with age. They weren't from Eleanor. They were signed by Thomas, Eleanor's missing fiancé. I read through them quickly. They weren't love letters. They were desperate. "Eleanor, I don't know what's happening. The house won't let me leave. Every time I try, something stops me. I hear it at night. It whispers. It knows my name. I'm so cold. It won't let me sleep." The final letter was short. I never left. The moment I finished reading, every door in the mansion slammed shut at once. Footsteps thundered through the hallways, not slow, not cautious, running, but the house was empty. I turned back toward the door, but it was closed. I grabbed the handle. It wouldn't budge. Then breathing. Right behind me, a shallow, raspy exhale, close enough that I should have felt it on my skin. Then a whisper. "Why did you open it?" I didn't turn around. I kept my hand on the door handle and pulled with everything I had. The door wouldn't move. The breathing grew louder, then bang, a sudden deafening pounding at the front door of the mansion. I ran, down the hall, through the staircase, toward the entrance. The banging didn't stop. It was frantic. I reached the door and yanked it open. The groundskeeper, his face was pale, eyes wide. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "Get out." I didn't argue. I sprinted past him out into the cold night. I didn't turn around. We didn't stop until we reached the tree line at the edge of the property. The mansion loomed behind us, its windows dark. The groundskeeper let go of my arm, still watching the house. Then he told me the truth. Eleanor's fiancé never disappeared. He became part of the house. Eleanor had kept it contained. That's why she never left. The house couldn't be empty, because if it was, it would get stronger. The next morning, my uncle found out what I'd done. He used it against me in court, claimed I was unstable, reckless, that I was imagining things, that I had let the past consume me. I didn't argue. I couldn't, because the moment I stepped back inside the house, the whispers started again. But this time, they came from every direction. I barely made it through the night. After opening the locked room, the whispers had changed. They weren't just calling my name anymore. They were laughing, soft, mocking, coming from every direction. By morning, the legal attack escalated. My uncle filed for emergency eviction. If the court approved it, I'd be forcibly removed from the mansion. If that happened, the inheritance was gone. If Eleanor was right, I wouldn't just lose the house. It would follow me. I spent the morning searching Eleanor's study. There had to be something. Some answer, some way to fix what I had done. That's when I found the last letter. It was tucked inside an old ledger written in Eleanor's sharp, deliberate handwriting. I kept it contained. "If you leave, it will follow you instead." Underneath the letter was a torn scrap of paper, part of a ritual, something Eleanor had done to keep the entity inside the house. I went to find the groundskeeper. He was waiting for me. For the first time, he explained everything. Eleanor had a method to calm the house. She locked every single door and read from a specific passage of a missing journal. If I didn't do it soon, it would attach to me permanently. Before I could even start the ritual, my lawyer called. He had never taken sides before. He had always been neutral. But now, he told me one thing. Avoid your uncle at all costs. He knows what's inside. That night, the whispers changed again. They stopped calling my name. Now they mimicked my voice, repeating everything I said. I tested it, whispering a single word. A second later, something whispered it back. Then I woke up at 3 a.m. Someone was standing at the foot of my bed, tall, unmoving. I turned on the lamp. Nothing was there. I found the groundskeeper again. The next morning, this time he told me the truth. He was supposed to be the next caretaker, but he ran. He left Eleanor to deal with it alone. I asked him why. He wouldn't answer. I tried to leave, just to see if I could. My car started. For the first time in weeks, it actually worked. I drove 5 miles away before checking my GPS. It had rerouted me, straight back to the mansion. That night, I tested another theory. I walked the hallways, watching the paintings. At first, nothing happened. Then I noticed it. The eyes followed me, not an illusion. They actually shifted. I finally understood why my uncle wanted the house so badly. I overheard him on a call. He didn't just want the property, he wanted what was inside. I had 2 weeks before my final court date, 2 weeks before I'd be forcibly removed, and I had a feeling that's exactly what it wanted. That night, I searched the mansion again. In the chimney, I found Eleanor's final journal entry. "If I fail, don't let it touch you. If you hear it behind you, never turn around." I sat in the study, reading through the letters one last time. Then something whispered, but it wasn't the usual voice. It was mine. "You're running out of time." I had less than a week before the court date. If my uncle won, I'd be forcibly removed from the house. And if Eleanor was right, I wouldn't be leaving alone. My lawyer warned me. I needed proof that I was stable. No rants about hauntings, no mention of the entity, just facts. But the house wasn't going to let that happen. That night, the whispers stopped. Instead, the house changed its game. At 2 a.m., I heard my mother's voice, calling my name from the hallway. She wasn't here. I checked the security cameras. Nothing. I didn't leave my room. At midnight the next day, my phone rang, my father's caller ID. I answered. My own voice whispered, "Let me in." The call disconnected. The next morning, the locked room was open again. I had sealed it, bolted it shut, but the door was wide open. The trunk was missing. Later that afternoon, my uncle showed up, unannounced. He wasn't smug. He wasn't angry. He was afraid. "You need to leave. Now." Then he left. That night, my lawyer called for an urgent meeting. When I arrived, he closed the blinds, locked the door, and spoke quietly. Eleanor had a clause in her will preventing me from telling you earlier. She believed you needed to experience the house first, or you wouldn't believe the truth. Eleanor didn't just inherit the house, she was its last line of defense. Every generation before her had someone who lived here, someone who acted as its keeper. But there was one difference. Eleanor was the first to try and contain it. That's why she never left, and that's why she made sure I was the one to inherit it. My uncle had known. Years ago, he had tried to force Eleanor to sell the house. She refused, because he wasn't just after the inheritance. He wanted to see what would happen if the house was abandoned. I found the groundskeeper one last time. He didn't waste words. No matter what happens, do not let them force you out. That night, the house fought back. The walls shifted, not creaking, breathing, expanding and contracting, like a massive living thing. Then the whispers turned to screams. They came from inside the walls. I ran. Everything went black. I felt something grab me. I woke up hours later, sprawled on the floor. Red handprints covered my wrists, like someone had been holding me down. The morning of the court date, I arrived exhausted, bruised and weak. My uncle and cousins smirked. They thought they'd already won. Then, while I was in court, my cousin snuck into the house. His last text, "Wait, who else is here?" I checked the security cameras remotely. My cousin stood in the foyer, frozen, staring at something behind the camera. Then, the screen cut to black. The hearing ended, but my cousin never made it home. His car was still outside the mansion. The driver's side door was open, keys in the ignition, engine off, but he was gone. Then at dawn, I heard shuffling in the locked room. When I checked the cameras, he was there, curled up in a fetal position, eyes vacant. He didn't remember how he got inside, but his shoes were caked with dust from the hidden passages Eleanor had once sealed. By morning, my uncle's attitude had completely changed. The smugness was gone. The threats were gone. Now he was panicked. He went straight to the police, flipping the script. He accused me of making my cousin disappear. The police arrived within the hour. They searched the house, top to bottom, every room, every passage. They found nothing. I was alone. I locked myself in Eleanor's study and reread her final entry. If it gets desperate, it will take someone. It always does. She never stayed for the inheritance. She stayed to keep it from taking anyone else. That evening, the groundskeeper returned. For the first time, he looked afraid. He told me the only way to get my cousin back was to reseal the entity inside the locked room, the way Eleanor did. As I prepared the ritual, the house fought back. The walls groaned. The air thickened. It knew. Then my cousin's voice. But it wasn't right. It echoed from every direction, layered like multiple voices speaking at once. "You should have left." Then it revealed itself. A shifting shadow, crawling along the walls. It stretched, unfolding limbs that bent the wrong way. It didn't walk, it moved. I followed Eleanor's instructions, reading aloud from the final passage in her journal, Latin phrases scrawled in her frantic handwriting. The words weren't just a chant, they were a warning. As I sealed the locked room, I poured the vial of iron-dusted salt Eleanor had hidden in the chimney, reinforcing the barrier she had placed decades ago. The whispers became screams. The walls convulsed. Then the final latch clicked, and silence fell. A moment later, I heard a car door slam. I ran outside. My cousin was sitting in his car, staring straight ahead. When I asked what happened, he didn't remember. The next morning, my uncle dropped the case. He didn't argue, didn't fight. He wanted nothing to do with the house anymore. The estate is legally mine now, but I finally understand. This isn't just a house. It's a prison, and I am now its warden. A year has passed since I sealed the entity back inside the locked room. Since then, the house has been quiet. No whispers, no shifting shadows, no footsteps at night. But I never leave it empty, not even for a second. My family has cut me off completely. My uncle and cousins refuse to speak to me. My parents keep their distance. No one wants to talk about what happened. No one asks if my cousin remembers anything, because he doesn't. He acts normal, works his job, spends time with friends. But sometimes, I catch him staring at the house, not at me, not at anything in particular, just the house. The groundskeeper disappears. One day, he's here. The next gone, no goodbye, no warning. His truck is still in town, but no one knows where he went. Then the nightmares start. In my dreams, I see Eleanor. She stands at the edge of my bed, watching me. Then she leans in and whispers, "The house is just waiting." The emails come next. Anonymous messages, all asking the same thing. Is the house for sale? Some of them mention the whispers, the shifting walls, the locked room. No one should know about that. The lawyer calls me. For the first time, he tells me the truth. He always knew. Before hanging up, he warns me. Never trust anyone who wants this house. Someone tampers with the court documents. I get an alert that my property records were accessed. Someone tried to erase my ownership, as if they wanted to claim the house in secret. Then the stranger appears. A well-dressed man knocks on my door. He calls himself a historian. He asks about the whispers, the shifting walls, Eleanor's ritual. I never told anyone those things. Before leaving, he smiles and says, "You won this round." But the house doesn't like losing. That night, I checked the locked room. The bolts are still in place, but the door handle looks new, like it was recently replaced. I dig through old records, the original blueprints of the mansion. The locked room wasn't there before Eleanor moved in. She built it, which means the entity used to be somewhere else. As I drift off to sleep, I hear a voice. It comes from inside the locked room. "I remember you now,